Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Discourse on Radio GBX. As a reminder, my name is Josh, and I'm here with my liberal and conservative panelists, James and Isaac. Do you guys just want to briefly introduce yourselves?
Hi, I am James. I'm the liberal panelist. I'm co-chair of the UW-GB College Dems and a poli-sci student.
Hi, my name is Isaac Erickson. I am the conservative or Republican panelist on the show today, and I also study political science on campus here.
Cool. So last time on the show, we talked a little bit, or mostly just talked about local elections because we were talking about it right before the spring elections in Wisconsin. So it's been about a week since those elections. Things kind of both turned out how we thought, and maybe not how we turned out how we thought. So, James, based on the results, kind of how do you kind of view what the results were for this election?
I think from a liberal point of view, we lost a lot of battles, but kind of won the war in a local sense, if that makes sense. Because, the UW-GB College Dems are pretty heavily involved in campaigning for Barb Dorff, who ended up losing to Jennifer Grant by a couple hundred votes. A lot of us also campaigned for Professor John Shelton, who lost by a few votes. I think it was like 40 or 50. And Gloria Eastman, another candidate we supported, lost. But Joey won, and at the end of the day, we ended up flipping city council. I think it's 7-5 progressive-minded now. So, a lot of small losses, but an overall victory.
Were the losses kind of expected in your mind, or were they a little bit surprising?
The other ones were kind of expected. They're great candidates and they ran really well campaigns, but you kind of can get a feel for who's on the back foot sometimes. Sometimes, name recognition is a big thing, and Barb Dorff was an established name, and I really expected Barb to win because the predictions said, based on the election from last year, the predictions said that 829 votes would get her the win, but she got 860 and lost to Jennifer Grant, who had over 1,000, which, the weather probably had something to do with that. Trump being in town definitely made it harder, but it is what it is. There's nothing you can do about it now. Politics is one of those things that you can do absolutely everything right and still lose.
And Isaac, how do you kind of view the results of last week's election?
Yeah, I want to echo the first thing that James said. I think for many Republicans, it felt like a bit of a loss, I should say a win locally, but then in a broader sense, there were a couple takeaways that did feel like a loss. Just a couple things I want to highlight. Like James said, Jennifer Grant did win the local seat within the city, but while that was a good thing, the numbers were not in favor of Grant as much as many Republicans would have hoped. So while this area does appear to still be Republican, and looking to the congressional election coming up, that is definitely a positive from the Republican perspective. But when you look at the state-wide map, this area needs to be strong Republican to take the larger statewide races. So the Green Bay area, a few other counties across the state. If you look at La Crosse, certain areas outside of the larger cities of Milwaukee, Madison, those tend to be the swing counties. So Green Bay is one of them. And for the Republicans to have a lot of success across the state as a whole, particularly in the U.S. Senate race, or looking at the presidential races coming up, this area really needs to be strong Republican for the state vote as a whole to go Republican. So ideally, Republicans would want to see just a higher percentage of votes going Republican, and we really didn't get that after this local election.
And you mentioned like the congressional race because Mike Gallagher is going to be resigning within 10 days, 10 days that he's going to be resigning because he resigns on April 19th, which I'm sure many people also know as the day of Taylor Swift's new album dropping. That's the important thing that day. But so Mike Gallagher will be resigning and they won't be able to fill that seat until November because per state law, they can't have a special election, I think, after April 2nd. So that the seat's going to be vacant. So they're going to be, because we already have candidates. We have Roger Roth. We have Andre Jacques. We have a new candidate. I forget the name.
Is that Kristen Lyerly?
Yeah, we have Kristen Lyerly is running as a Democrat, but then there's another Republican who's running.
The new Republican running, he actually has not officially announced yet. His name is Tony. I looked up a couple different pronunciations of the name, but the last name is either Wied or Wied.
I've heard Wied, but I'm not sure if that's the actual.
We can go with Wied then.
But yeah, he's been endorsed by former President Donald Trump.
Yes, he has.
Before he's even running. So that kind of, assuming he does run, he will likely be the nominee because Trump's endorsement usually carries a lot of weight in a Republican primary compared to even in the general, obviously the success rate's a little iffy on the Trump endorsement, but I think usually in primaries, if you're endorsed by Trump, you usually win an election. So obviously, there's still going to be a primary. We'll see if Roth or Jacques can overcome that. But what are you guys' thoughts on that?
I think what you said, that the Trump endorsement is definitely, it goes a long way. I believe the most recent, poll that went out had it didn't even look at Tony Wied as an option. It had Andre Jacques, it had Roger Roth, and it had Alex Bruesewitz, who is a former, he might be still current, I guess, but he worked with the Trump campaign, and he was the projected front runner coming into this week before Trump's endorsement of Wied. Mm-hmm. So it was a bit complicated how that went. My understanding is Bruesewitz was considering running for the 8th congressional seat, but when Tony Wied came up as an option, Bruesewitz appears to be taking a step back and allowing Wied to be the front runner then. That allowed Trump to then endorse Wied, and it appears that then that would put the other Republican candidates, Jacques and Roth, a step behind Wied. I'm not sure what that primary race will actually look like. I think it depends. If Jacques or Roth drop out soon, then that could give potential votes to the other candidate not endorsed by Trump. So let's just say Jacques drops out, likely Jacques' votes would go toward Roth, because those two candidates will likely be supported by members of the Republican Party who are not wanting the Trump-endorsed candidate. It'll be interesting to see how many of those within this northeastern part of the state there actually are. That is definitely left to be seen.
James?
I think a Trump endorsement is kind of a poison pill almost, because I'm not an expert. I'm just a student still. But there's definitely a pattern that Republicans can't win a primary against someone who's Trump endorsed. Mm-hmm. But Democrats have realized that Trump endorsement is a negative in the general elections. I believe in the 2022 election, the Democratic Party they contributed to the primaries of a lot of MAGA candidates. Mm-hmm. And I think you have to consider the district that it's going in. This is, it's traditionally been an R-leaning district, but Mike Gallagher is kind of a moderate Republican. Mm-hmm. And I think I think Dr. Kristen Lyerly is trying to capitalize on that. She's an OBGYN, and she's, as far as I can tell from her platform, she's kind of campaigning as a pro-abortion moderate. So I don't think you have the chance for like a far leftist candidate to win that district. And I guess the election will tell if a far right candidate will win the district, because I'm just going to assume that the Trump endorsement is going to win the nomination.
Mm-hmm. And I think in 2022, at least in terms of statewide races, only one Trump endorsed candidate won a general election. That was J.D. Vance of Ohio, I believe. He's the only Trump endorsed statewide candidate to one. I would have to see like the statistics on like the local or more local races, like House races or whatnot, but that definitely plays a role. And yeah, Kristen Lyerly, I think, ran in 2020 for assembly, I think. So she's not like
assembly against John Mako. She lost 48 to 52.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, she's been around a bit, and obviously, if she's going to run on abortion, that is an issue that does work for elections. But we'll see, considering the partisan lean of the state.
That is a topic we should talk about sometime. We should probably not now, because that'll suddenly suck up the rest of the radio show. But that's a nuanced issue I wish more people would discuss honestly.
Mm-hmm. I do think Wied jumping in is interesting and getting the Trump endorsement, because the only thing I know about him is that he used to own those Dino Stop
gas
stations. That's his kind of claim to fame, which that's interesting. So it's kind of interesting that more or less this kind of random guy is being endorsed by Trump, because I don't think anyone really heard of him wanting to run until this happened. So that's interesting in my mind.
And interestingly, I don't know how permanent it'll be, but lately there's definitely been a shift where no political experience is almost an advantage in an election. Because if you have political experience, like you've voted for and against policies that people find controversial, like if you've served in public office, there is something that someone can dig up on you and spin to make it sound like you're the worst person ever. But if you've never run for it, you're unproven, which is normally a disadvantage, because nobody quite knows what to expect out of you. But then there's also much less dirt people can dig up on you in general.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do think that definitely often is a positive for exactly the reason you said, that there isn't as much dirt on the individual. I do think that for someone like Tony Wied, name recognition will be a challenge right from the start, because he appears to be someone that not many people know or recognize right away. So someone like Roger Roth, I mean, he ran for lieutenant governor and had a lot of success going for that back just a couple of years ago. And then Andre Jacques, he's definitely been in this district for a while, so he can gain a lot of name recognition from that. But Tony Wied, I think he will have a ways to go. So where his lack of political experience might be a positive for his campaign, at the same time, not a lot of people know him, and there could be trust issues going in, whereas someone like Jacques Roth or even Kristen Lyerly, who has run for positions in the past, will be recognized and could gain additional support from that.
Mm-hmm. For the Democrat side, because on the Republican side we have 3 candidates now, but on the Democrat side there's only Kristen Lyerly. Do you think any other Democrats are going to jump in, or is it going to kind of consolidate around Lyerly?
I think it's going to consolidate again around Lyerly, just because it's a tradition. I'm not sure how the redistricting is going to affect it. I have not looked into that yet, but it's a traditional R district, and I think Dr. Lyerly needs to convince the DNC that hers is a campaign worth investing in first before anything really gets started. And if there's already that question, it's going to be anybody else who tries to run against her is facing multiple uphill battles at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it'll I think it'll coalesce around Lyerly.
I also think that makes a lot of sense. Just from a Republican perspective looking in, I could see where the Democrat Party would see this congressional seat as very important. Of course, the House is close, so there isn't much of a majority for Republicans. So the Democrats are very close to overtaking that majority. But with this seat already having a candidate endorsed by Trump, this would be a huge win for Democrats to put a candidate out there and have just all support going toward that one candidate being Lyerly, and then hopefully carrying that through for Democrats, of course, to win against the Republican candidate.
Mm-hmm.
But I think just in general, regardless of who's running, like important elections are good for democracies. Like if either party has like 2/3 majority in the House or Senate, it almost feels like your vote doesn't mean that much. Okay, you flipped one seat, so now they can still pass literally everything they want. But when the margins are so fine, that makes the election more important, and that makes like the opinions and the voice of the voters in those districts carry a lot more weight. And I think that's always how it should be. I have not been a fan. If I remember correctly, the district hasn't really been contested much before. And I'm just kind of glad to see it contested.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the last time a Democrat had represented the district was before 2010, because that's when Ribble was elected in the Tea Party wave. And then obviously Ribble, passed it off to Gallagher, and then obviously now Gallagher is resigning. So obviously we're talking about there being a primary, but kind of what are the reasons for there being a primary? Because Gallagher had announced that he was going to retire. He wasn't going to run for re-election. I think he was already in the race to run for re-election, but then he decided to withdraw that, and then now he's resigning. So what are kind of the core reasons behind that? Kind of moving into our next topic, because for background, Gallagher voted against the impeachment of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, and he was one of 3 Republicans to do so. So they had 2 votes. The first one failed, and that's when people were upset at Gallagher, and that's when he decided to retire. And then they did a second vote, and it passed by, I think, a 1-vote margin. So kind of, do you think that it was because I think Gallagher said that he wants to spend more time with his family and go back to the private sector, but the timing of it being within a week of that vote and the backlash against him, and then they wanted to do a primary challenge. So how do you think those national politics kind of affected this race?
So a candidate who's in office saying, I want to spend more time with my family now, it's very common. That is often an excuse for getting out. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. It's always hard to tell. That was something that former House Majority Speaker Paul Ryan from Wisconsin, that's the exact same thing he said when he chose not to run again. With Gallagher, it is interesting with the timing. I'm glad you pointed that out, Josh. He has been a solid Republican figure within Washington for a few years now, and he has been considered one of the Republicans with the brightest future. So him stepping down has definitely come as a surprise to many, but it does make more sense with the more controversial stances he has taken recently, especially with the Mayorkas vote, where he didn't vote to impeach Mayorkas. So I personally believe that Gallagher wanted to move on. His background is in cybersecurity. He was, I believe, a Marine, and that was his area of specialty. It was cybersecurity, it was intelligence, and I believe he was in the Middle East. So him being in Congress, that's definitely a change of pace. from what he was used to in the military. So I imagine he wasn't a big fan of the very slow process and procedures that are required in Congress. And I have seen where he has voiced this before, especially with his focus on China, which was his primary focus as a congressman from this district. So I do think he wasn't particularly content being in Congress. And as evidence for this, he just recently announced, or I don't think he announced it, but some people close to him announced that he did take a position working for a private company.
Like a defense contractor, I think, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's exactly a defense contractor, but they do their main focus is defense. So that's pretty quick for a congressman to announce that they're no longer running, and then to immediately have that job lined up. So my assumption is that job was lined up before he announced that he wasn't going to run, before he even made the Mayorkas vote. So I wonder if in some ways it was the other way around, where he knew he had the job lined up, so he knew he wasn't going to be running again, and that gave him the ability to go against the tide that the Republican Party was going, to say, okay, I want to vote what I truly believe instead of what's going to get me elected and get me back in office. Personally, that makes me respect Gallagher a lot. I'm not a huge fan of politicians, leaving office and going straight into a very high-paying private sector job. I guess you could say it's something they've earned, but I like when they stick it out with politics and continue helping within as public servants. But I do think that him stepping down did give him the ability to take a step back and do what he truly believed.
I think Gallagher is kind of I think the internal power struggles of the Republican Party probably had something to do with it. Like, Gallagher is fairly moderate for a Republican, and moderate Republicans and MAGAs don't necessarily play too well together. And just because of the razor-thin margins, like, the hardcore MAGA House Republicans kind of, there's not that many of them, but they kind of control the House at the moment. You just saw it not that long ago when Speaker Johnson got elected. The Democrats aren't obviously going to vote to keep a Republican speaker. They can, if you don't follow along with their agenda, they can kind of ruin you a little bit. And, I'd never vote for him, but I do respect Gallagher for voting no and stepping down, because a lot of times I feel like a politician's only purpose is to try to get reelected. And I really don't like that, because, the action that's going to, provide really good public messaging and, look good for camera and press is often at odds with, the real problem and what needs to get done. So I do applaud him for, not engaging in political showmanship and, doing what he felt was right and leaving on his own terms.
Yeah, and Isaac, you mentioned that he had, people viewed him as having a bright future in the Republican Party. I heard because he was floated a couple times as running for U.S. Senate against Tammy Baldwin, and he decided not to do that. People floated him for governor of Wisconsin, even president. So it's kind of remarkable to see him just call it quits and leave all that behind.
It really is. I wouldn't be surprised to see his step into the private sector be temporary, but I would be surprised if he enters back in I guess a legislative role. I believe he would make an incredible director of the national security, or some role within the CIA, there would be a lot of jobs that I think would be more suitable for him in that, in one of those departments, and I think he would do an incredible job.
So like rather than a straight politician, more like one of the administrators. 'Cause
Exactly.
I definitely agree that he seems more like he's more inclined to actually do things as opposed to have to go through the process of Congress, where it's like, oh, you have to I want to do this thing, and oh, it has to go through the committee, so you can just kind of do those things. That makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I personally believe he's already more than qualified for a role like that within the NSA or the CIA, or even, there's roles within the Department of Homeland Security that would be applicable, just from his military experience. But then already he's been in Congress, and he has a lot of knowledge and again, experience within intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
You got those qualifications and a former member of Congress. You'll never be looking for employment for long.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So we're talking about Gallagher, but then we can kind of go into the kind of inciting the kind of core of the whole issue because we're talking about the Republican power struggle, the kind of the way Congress is. So obviously we have the impeachment of Alejandro Mayorkas, and that trial is going to be starting this week, or at least the articles of impeachment are going to be transmitted to the Senate. And that was kind of a core policy position or policy initiative, but it's core initiative of the Republicans when they regained the House in 2022 because they disagree with the Biden administration's handling of the border. The whole border crisis, and they believe that Mayorkas and the Biden administration have not done their job in terms of policing the border. So impeaching Mayorkas, who's only the second cabinet secretary ever to be impeached, is kind of it sets a precedent. And that was part of the reason I think that was one of the reasons Gallagher gave in his no vote, is that he didn't want to set a precedent, because then you can just say that, you can just impeach anyone for policy disagreement as opposed to actual crime. So kind of how do you guys view the impeachment?
I think it's politically motivated. I think that it's MAGA trying to get revenge for Trump being impeached twice. And the reason I say that is because Mayorkas is the Secretary of Homeland Security. And you can disagree or agree with his policies all you want, but his job is to apply the policies that Biden puts forth. These are Biden's policies. He's just the one executing them. And if you really believe that those policies are that unconstitutional or that blatantly wrong that impeachment is warranted, Biden is the one you should be impeaching. And there is a long impeachment inquiry about Biden, basically since the moment he stepped into office, and it essentially went nowhere. There's kind of an admission that Biden didn't do anything impeachable. You can disagree with him. Like, I disagree with Biden on some stuff. Plenty of things, actually. But he didn't do anything impeachable. And I also believe that we as a society are going to have to figure it out when it comes to immigration. Because we're starting to run into the problem that every single developed country seems to run into, and that is declining birth rates. And nobody has figured out how to run an economy on a shrinking population. And you've got water scarcity all over the world. I believe we're going to have a bunch of climate refugees soon. So I absolutely believe that we do need to make a lot more secure border to keep out people that we don't want, that are not going to contribute to our society. But I think we also need to make it a lot easier for people to emigrate legally, because we do have a lot of people that are currently in the United States illegally, but the vast majority of them never snuck across the border. They came here on visas and never left.
Yeah, there's a couple things I'd love to respond to. James had a lot of great points. So first thing, I wouldn't call the impeachment attempt surrounding Mayorkas I wouldn't call it revenge. I personally think it is legitimate. But at the same time, I also completely believe that it is political. So, anytime there's going to be impeachment, there's going to be, one side saying, oh, he did nothing wrong, and the other side saying, no, this person did everything wrong. And that it's always going to be political. It was with Trump. It is with attempts that James mentioned to impeach Biden. It just is going to be political. But, regarding the crisis at the border, I truly believe that there has been many incompetent decisions from the Biden administration that's allowing many immigrants to enter with protected, I shouldn't say status, but it is protected temporary status, who we know will not be eligible for status in the long run. So we have many immigrants coming to the border and suggesting that they might be eligible for asylum or for another area that they could receive status through. But we're not doing sufficient screening. We're just letting them in and saying, okay, you can apply for asylum in a year, when what should be occurring, and this was what typically has happened in the past, and what is supposed to happen, there's supposed to be the credible fear interview, which, when it comes to asylum, it basically just establishes that, yes, this person actually has credible fear, and they might be eligible to apply for asylum and then to obtain status through the asylum application. Currently, the Biden administration is not following those guidelines as they have been set up and been used, really, I believe, since Clinton was president back in the 90s. So we really, I see the current situation as very much a problem and a crisis that is caused by the Biden administration. I don't think that Donald Trump got everything right with immigration. In fact, I think he did things that were harmful regarding immigration. He did a lot to slow immigration and to simplify things, but he didn't make the process simpler for making the process toward becoming a citizen or to gaining status simpler. He didn't make it more efficient, but he did slow. So I do support some of those policies that Trump was aiming for, but I don't support the full thing. I want to see exactly what James said just a couple moments ago. I want to see that the U.S. make it easier for those who are eligible for status to obtain that status.
Mm-hmm. And I mostly agree with what Isaac's saying, but with some small differences. This is why I believe the whole thing is political, because I think the way the Biden administration is handling the border crisis is they're doing what they can with the funds available. Like this, if this is a problem that you seriously feel needs to be addressed, it is something you need to put more resources, more departments, more people on solving. And it wasn't that long ago that a Republican-authored bipartisan border security bill was about to get put forward in the House, but Trump killed it because immigration is an issue that he wants to campaign on. Mm-hmm. And you can't really have it both ways, in my opinion. Like, this was not like a Democrat, just Democrats ramming whatever policy they want with the objection of the Republicans. This was a bipartisan bill. Everyone pretty much agreed on it. And you can't have it both ways. You can't criticize the way things are going at the same time as you sabotage efforts to fix it. And I understand why he did that, because, so much of politics is doing what it takes to get elected next election rather than doing the right thing. But I definitely don't like it. And I feel like Mayorkas impeachment is kind of motivated to draw validity to the claim that the Biden administration is bungling border policy, when I think that disagreements with how Biden is handling the border are a result of the lack of funding and resources that we've put toward actually solving it.
And obviously, we talk about it being an issue to campaign on, which it certainly will be. Like, I don't think there's anyone doubting that immigration is going to play a major role in this election, because it usually does.
Yeah, you usually hear about it once every 4 years.
Yeah, so immigration is definitely going to be an issue, and with Donald Trump on the ballot for the third time in a row, that immigration is probably his biggest issue, I would argue, because that's kind of a major issue in this country, obviously. So how much of an impact do you think the Mayorkas impeachment, the failure to pass that bipartisan border security bill, and then just kind of the general controversy around immigration, how much of a role do you think that's going to play?
I think it will have a very large impact on the upcoming election and just on policies in general. So, like Josh, you mentioned, immigration. It is the largest concern of Americans heading into the presidential elections. So, well, I guess I'll say this. Typically, economic concerns tend to be the number one concern for American voters, and if not number one, a close second. But currently, immigration and I guess just overall like crisis within the U.S., like immigration, that is the number one concern. I saw numbers just, I believe it was from Reuters a couple days ago, that indicated just that the largest concern was immigration. So and then a close second was, well, it wasn't particularly close, but the second was economic. So that is what American voters are looking at right now. And I don't know what the result of the Mayorkas impeachment articles will have, but I do know that with the impeachment process, it is keeping immigration at the front of people's minds heading into the election. And I think that will help Republicans a lot. Yes, there were immigration struggles when Trump was in office, but we're seeing a lot more under Biden. So I think the longer that the impeachment is going on, the longer that we're continuing to see the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, Customs and Border Patrol, or CBP. The longer we're seeing those agencies struggle to contain immigration and to stay on top of what is going on at the border, the more that happens, the more Republicans will benefit. I think we're going to be seeing it in local elections in the South, in New Mexico, Texas, Arizona, California in particular. But I think we're going to start to see it nationally too, and I do think it'll have a large impact on the presidential election. But I do think that impact will be in favor of the right, in favor of Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
So I just pulled up a Gallup poll from early March, and it has immigration as the number one. But interestingly, the second largest problem it has listed is the government and poor leadership. And I think that how big of an impact immigration has depends on how each party does their messaging. Because being concerned over immigration can mean a lot of different things. Like, I'm sure me and Isaac can both say that abortion is an important issue we're very concerned about, but we're going to mean completely different things by that. And if it depends on who gets their messaging out to their audience better. 'Cause I suspect Trump and the Republicans are going to push a message that the Biden administration is completely incompetent when it comes to the border. And I believe that the Biden administration is going to push a message that they're trying to fix it, but that the Republican Party is incapable of actually governing. And I think it really depends on who gets that message out to their base better at this point.
Yeah, I think that's an incredible point, that a lot of it will come down to messaging and just reaching each candidate's particular audience, their targeted audience, but then also the ones in the middle, the ones who are undecided. I do think that Biden has a ways to go to show that he is capable of being president another 4 years. I've heard students on campus, I've heard from others say that, yeah, they're considering voting for Biden, but they don't trust that he will actually serve for another 4 years as president. They think there's a decent chance he will pass away in the meantime. No one truly wants a president to die in office. I mean, that creates a lot of turmoil in a government, in a country, even with a VP that is going to be there to take the president's place. So I do think that that's a major concern for Biden, and I think it will be a struggle for him to get his message out unless he does really hit the campaign trail. I mean, we've already seen Trump in Green Bay just a few days ago. Are we going to see Biden in Green Bay?
He's in Madison right now.
Is he?
Yep.
Well, I mean, I think that is the type of thing that is going to help Biden if he is truly able to get out and run an active campaign, something that Trump has proven he can do, and something that Trump is definitely doing.
Mm-hmm. What do you guys think both Biden and Trump can do to kind of reach voters on these issues, or on those issues specifically?
I'm not sure what Biden. So first of all, I think this election is going to come. It's not going to come down to which candidate people like more. We have two candidates, and both of them are pretty heavily disliked. I think this election is going to come down to which candidate people are more scared of. That makes sense. But Biden has spent most of his adult life in public office in one form or another. I'm not sure what he's going to pull, but he is cagey. Like, he got elected to his first term on student loan forgiveness. And then, dude, not a peep out of him for like a year and a half. And then right when the midterms come up, then he pushes it forward. Because he knows if he acted on that right away, the messaging would get lost by the time the next election rolls around. So I'm not sure what it is, but I am absolutely sure that he's got a plan. He is a career politician. He really knows and understands how to play the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do think that what James just said about which candidate are people least afraid of. I think currently a lot of Americans are afraid of Biden. So when Trump was in office, I heard a lot of people saying, I'm just not sure what Trump's going to do. But other countries saw that same issue. So you didn't see China being aggressive toward Taiwan. You didn't see Russia being aggressive toward Ukraine. You also saw less immigrants entering the U.S. So there was uncertainty, but with that there was stability. And we didn't see Trump creating major crises throughout the whole country. I think with Biden, what I'm seeing is more of an incompetence, where his lack of action, or sometimes, in some cases, his overemphasis on certain policies, it ends up being negative for the country. And I do truly believe that a lot of voters see that, recognize that, and view him as a very dangerous president currently. So if he does pull something like James suggested he might, I think it would need to be something big. I think it would need to be an issue that matters to a lot of voters. And I'm not sure if even that could gain him the support that he needs to really be the front runner, that voters want as their president from 2024 through 2028.
Kind of going back to the Mayorkas impeachment, because obviously, yeah, the politics of it all are very important. For the Mayorkas impeachment, I think they're planning, or Chuck Schumer, who's the majority leader of the Senate, is more or less planning on just dismissing the charges when they're transmitted to the Senate. Do you guys think that's a good move to just kind of dismiss it outright, or should they actually have a trial?
I think it'd be good for to have a trial, just to get all the facts, the opinions out there, broadcasted, and let people make up their own minds. Because if you just dismiss it without even hearing what it's about, you put the message, that's putting the message like, oh, that's one of our own, so they're above the law. I think they should absolutely have the trial. I highly doubt that he's going to be convicted. I think there's a 0% chance that he's going to get convicted, but that's not the point. Like, the point is kind of to put the messaging out that he's been impeached, which is kind of the same thing that happened with Trump. Like, there was no way the Senate was ever going to convict him on either of those impeachments, but it's the process, and now you can say that Donald Trump has been impeached.
Mm-hmm.
I find that it would be a negative for Democrats to go ahead and actually to hear the issues in the Senate. My reason for saying that is something I mentioned just a couple minutes ago, that it would give attention to the immigration crisis. And I think that would be very negative for Democrats. As a Republican, I'm all for that. I think it is a crisis, and I think it does need to be paid attention to. When it comes to the Trump impeachments that we saw during Trump's presidency, in many ways I see those as a crucifixion of Trump. It was about him. It wasn't about any particular issues. It was attacks on his character, it was attacks on certain policies that he had. With Mayorkas, it isn't about Mayorkas. It's about immigration and the policies of the administration. I could be wrong on that, but I don't think many Republicans truly care very much about where Mayorkas is at, but they do care about the decisions that are coming from his office. So I believe that immigration being looked at as a major issue is important for this country. I believe that the impeachment articles are legitimate, and they should be looked at by the Senate. I would be very much surprised if Chuck Schumer saw it the same way. I do assume he's gonna discard the charges, but then, I do hope that we continue to look at immigration as a major issue.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
did you want to say? Yeah.
I believe, immigration, like just climate change, climate refugees, immigration is going to progressively be a more and more important issue as time goes on. And it's definitely something that, people need to engage in, good faith beliefs over. But I don't think that Donald Trump's impeachments were purely political. I fully think that foreign interference into an election is, I don't care who did that. If Joe Biden invited foreign interference into an election, he should be impeached. Anyone who does that should be impeached. That is kind of by definition high crimes and misdemeanors. Now the second one I think the second impeachment was definitely more messaging because, by the time it went through, he was already definitely out of office. But I think that Donald Trump attempted to overthrow a legitimately elected government on January 6th, and that is not something that democracy can tolerate. Which it is more for I think the second one was more for the messaging, but our politics have gotten really uncivil, and we definitely need to get to a political space where the people we disagree with, respect the norms, the unwritten rules, and kind of the way things are done. Because you start disrespecting that, you can definitely get some short-term gains, but it's kind of at the harm of the system itself. Mm-hmm. It damages our institutions and our credibility.
Yeah, just a couple thoughts on that. That last thing that James said, I think that's so true. I mean, this country is very divided, and we do need people to come together to be able to have discussions, conversations about this stuff. I do see. I agree with James that foreign interference in an election, that is an impeachable offense. I definitely believe that. I don't find where the actual charges of that were legitimate. That's pretty much it for that.
Do you guys have anything else?
Yeah, I respectfully disagree. This could make a wonderful topic for another show. Mm-hmm. It absolutely could, but I'm not prepared enough to discuss that at the moment. This will be a whole lot of debate about the particular facts and the sourcing of the documents and who said what, said who. Mm-hmm. But, it is definitely a conversation that we should have.
Yeah. And I mean, too, we're running out of time here, but real quick, on last week, Donald Trump and Joe Biden were the only ones on the ballot, really. But they both lost votes to different challenges. Joe Biden lost votes to uninstructed and Dean Phillips. Donald Trump lost votes to Nikki Haley and I think Ron DeSantis. Does that indicate anything? Because I think it was 10% for uninstructed and then 13% for Nikki Haley.
I think Trump and Biden have got kind of opposite problems. I think Trump is kind of right of conservatives. So the people voting against Trump are more moderate Republicans that want a return to more moderate practices. Joe Biden, by kind of any definition, is a very moderate Democrat. And his problem is that the Democrat base barely tolerates him. So I think the votes against Biden are coming from people that are left of the Democratic Party. And I think that's probably what's going to take Biden over the edge, is that most of those leftists are going to be fine, I'll vote for Biden at some point. And he's just kind of in the position to attract a lot more moderate votes.
Mm-hmm.
I think that could definitely be the case with Biden. I do wonder if there is a lot of I can say this for a fact. There is a lot of discontent with President Biden. And I wonder if some of those votes that went uninstructed, if they will ever go to Biden. I'm wondering if the people who are, like James suggested, further left, are they even going to show up to vote? Do they feel that Biden even deserves that? When it comes down to it, I assume that the majority of those votes will go to Biden. Mm-hmm. But it does make me question. It at least leaves a question mark in my mind. When it comes to the votes for Nikki Haley in particular, I think it was, just a sign of many voters saying we aren't in favor of Trump. Like you said, Josh, it did. Most everyone knew that Trump was really the only Republican still in the race, but I think a fair amount of people didn't want to put their vote for him in the primary, although I do think that they will coming this November. I think by far a majority of the of the votes that weren't for Trump on the Republican portion of the ballot will end up going to Trump.
Yeah. Lot to think about, a lot of things to look forward, or not really look forward to maybe, but just look at, maybe pay attention to going into this year's election. That's all the time we have for this episode. I'd like to thank both my panelists for coming back and doing another show. I hope you guys have a good week, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Josh.